Hidden camera, true, filmed without permission. I've rewritten this opening a dozen times because every version makes me sound colder than I remember feeling. My name's William. I'm 37 now, and for most of my life I was the kind of person who could explain away almost anything. Not because I thought I was evil. Honestly, that would have been simpler. I just got very good at turning bad decisions into stories that sounded reasonable when I told them to myself. This happened 11 years ago. At the time I was broke, angry, and carrying around the kind of quiet humiliation that settles into your bones. I'd been laid off from a warehouse job outside Birmingham. Rent was late. My landlord had started knocking instead of texting. My little sister thought I was between opportunities. I let her believe that because admitting I spent most afternoons staring at the ceiling felt worse than hunger. Then there was Daniel. He wasn't a close friend. More like one of those guys who somehow keeps orbiting your life. Same neighborhood growing up, same bars, same people. The kind of man who always looked freshly ironed, always had cash, always knew somebody who knew somebody. He'd smile when he saw me, but it always felt like he was measuring me. A week before it happened, I ran into him at a pub. He bought 2 drinks and spent 20 minutes talking about a promotion, a new flat, a watch he kept turning so people would notice it. He asked what I'd been doing. I lied. Freelance delivery work, I said. He nodded like he could hear the emptiness in it. Then he made the mistake that started everything. He took out a thick envelope to pay a guy at the bar. Rent money, he said. Cash. A lot of it. More money than I'd seen in months. I remembered the exact moment the thought arrived. Not I should steal that. Just, he won't even miss it. That's how it starts, at least for people like me. Not with some dramatic decision. Just a small rotten sentence that feels harmless because you haven't acted on it yet. For the next 3 days I kept thinking about that envelope. I told myself it wasn't greed. I told myself it was survival. I told myself Daniel had always landed on his feet, while I kept sinking. I built a whole moral argument around desperation until taking something from him started to feel less like theft, and more like balance. That was the first lie. And once I believed that one, the rest came easily. For 3 days I kept replaying that night in my head. Not the conversation, the envelope. The way Daniel held it loosely, like cash was just another object. I started noticing details I'd ignored before. He lived above a locksmith's shop on Alder Street. Left around 8:30 most mornings. Usually came back after dark. On Thursdays he stopped at the same off-license, and stayed there long enough to talk football with the owner. I didn't think of it as stalking then. I called it figuring things out. That's another thing I learned about myself. Once I wanted something badly enough, I could rename almost anything until it sounded harmless. My plan was stupidly simple. Wait until Thursday. Slip into the building behind one of the tenants. Get to his door. Find the envelope. Leave before anyone noticed. I even convinced myself I wasn't planning a real burglary. No smashing locks, no masks, no weapon. Just in, take the cash, shout. The part that bothered me most wasn't getting caught. It was how calm I felt while preparing. Thursday came with rain, the kind that makes everyone hurry and look down. I remember thinking that weather was helping me. That thought still makes me sick. I got there around 8. Parked half a street away and sat in my car watching the entrance. My hands were cold, but not from fear. More from anticipation. At 8:37 Daniel came out wearing a dark jacket, umbrella tucked under his arm, and walked toward the high street without looking back. I waited another 10 minutes because I didn't want to seem obvious. Every minute felt louder than it should have. A woman with grocery bags came up to the building, and I caught the door before it closed. She barely looked at me. Just a tired nod, like I belonged there. The hallway smelled of damp plaster and old cigarettes. His flat was on the 2nd floor. That was when I noticed the first problem. I'd imagined the envelope sitting somewhere easy, kitchen counter, hallway table. Then I reached his door and realized I had no idea how I was getting inside. I stood outside his door pretending to check my phone while my mind started racing. Until that moment, I'd somehow built this fantasy where everything would simply line up for me. Instead, I was in a narrow hallway with a locked door and footsteps echoing somewhere below. Then I remembered something small. A month earlier, Daniel had complained at the pub that his front latch never caught properly unless he pulled it hard. At the time, it was meaningless. Standing there, it felt like the only useful fact in the world. I put my hand on the knob. It moved. Not wide, just enough to tell me it hadn't sealed all the way. That tiny click hit me harder than any alarm could have. My chest went tight. I should have walked away right then. A locked door would have given me an excuse to stop. Instead, I eased it open and stepped inside. The flat was quiet. Too quiet. And suddenly I wasn't imagining theft anymore. I was inside another man's life. The first thing I noticed was how ordinary everything looked. A pair of trainers by the wall. A half-read newspaper on the sofa. A mug in the sink with coffee dried around the rim. For some reason that made it worse. I'd built Daniel into this symbol of everything I resented, but standing there I was just in somebody's home, surrounded by boring little pieces of a normal life. I moved fast anyway. Living room first. Nothing. Kitchen drawers. Receipts, batteries, takeaway menus. My breathing sounded absurdly loud. Every tiny scrape of wood against metal made me freeze. Then I saw a black leather satchel hanging over the back of a chair. I crossed the room so quickly I nearly knocked over a lamp. Inside the bag were papers, a charger, a notebook, and, folded thick, the envelope. My pulse jumped so hard I felt it in my throat. I opened it just enough to see notes. Real cash. And that was the exact second I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. At first I thought I imagined it. Then came the unmistakable sound of someone climbing the stairs, slow, heavy, close. My whole body locked. The envelope was still in my hand, half out of the satchel, and suddenly every second felt sharpened. I killed the kitchen light without thinking. The flat dropped into shadow. My breathing got shallow and fast. I looked around for somewhere to hide and saw only terrible options, behind the curtains, under the table, beside the fridge. I crouched behind the living room door because panic makes stupid choices feel logical. The footsteps stopped outside. Then keys. Not Daniel. Different rhythm. Lighter, quicker. A woman's voice called his name once, casually, like she'd done it before. My stomach dropped so hard it hurt. She tried the handle. The latch held this time. I stayed frozen, one hand over my mouth. Through the gap I saw the outline of her standing there for a few seconds. Then she muttered something annoyed and walked back downstairs. I didn't move for another minute. Maybe 2. Maybe 10. Time had stopped making sense. When the stairwell finally went quiet, I realized my legs had gone numb. I stayed crouched there, listening so hard my ears started ringing. Every instinct said run. Instead I stood up, still gripping the envelope, and did something I still can't fully explain. I looked inside it. There were banknotes, yes, but also folded papers. Utility bills. A handwritten note. I didn't mean to read it, but my eyes landed on a line before I could stop myself. Mum's care home, Friday morning. Under that was an amount circled twice. That hit differently. Until then Daniel had been this polished guy I envied. Suddenly he was somebody worried about his mother, counting cash for something painfully ordinary. For a second I felt heat rise into my face, shame, maybe, or panic turning into something heavier. And then another sound came from outside. A door downstairs slammed. A male voice. Daniel's. That was when the adrenaline stopped feeling exciting and started feeling like drowning. The second I heard Daniel's voice downstairs, every thought scattered. He was closer than he should have been. Later I found out the rain had driven him back because he'd forgotten his wallet. At that moment all I knew was that he was coming up the stairs and I was standing in his flat with his money in my hand. I shoved the papers back into the envelopes so fast one slipped loose and drifted under the chair. I saw it happen and couldn't do anything about it. His footsteps hit the first landing. I moved without thinking. Through the kitchen, toward the back of the flat. There was a narrow service corridor, and a small rear door that opened onto metal stairs leading to the alley. My fingers slipped twice before I got the handle down. Behind me I heard his front door open. "Hello?" Not shouted. Just confused. That calm voice terrified me more than anger would have. I stepped onto the wet metal stairs, nearly lost my footing, and gripped the rail hard enough to burn my palm. Then I ran into the rain. I didn't stop until I reached my car. By then I was soaked through, breathing so hard it felt like my ribs were splintering. My hands wouldn't steady. I dropped the keys twice before I got the door open. For a minute I just sat there with the engine off, staring through the rain-blurred windscreen. The envelope was on the passenger seat. It looked smaller now. Dirtier. Less like salvation. Then my phone buzzed. My sister. I almost ignored it, but she kept calling. When I answered, she sounded shaken. Mum had slipped in her kitchen. Nothing catastrophic, but she'd hit her hip and needed someone to take her to urgent care. She asked where I was? I lied instantly. Said I was nearby. That was the strangest part of the night. 10 minutes earlier I'd been running from a burglary, and suddenly I was driving my mother to a clinic, nodding at nurses, filling out forms, pretending I was just another worried son. The envelope stayed hidden under my seat the whole time. I got home just after midnight. My clothes still smelled of rain and metal. The flat felt colder than usual. I locked the door, pulled the envelope from under the seat, and emptied it onto the kitchen table. £740. Not life-changing. Not enough to fix anything. Just enough to make what I'd done feel smaller and uglier. The folded paper that had slipped loose was still missing. I kept thinking about it under Daniel's chair like a fingerprint I'd forgotten to wipe away. I barely slept. Every sound outside made me sit upright. A car door. Footsteps. Someone laughing in the street. By morning I'd convinced myself police would be waiting downstairs. Instead there was only my phone. A message from Daniel. Weird one. Think someone got into my flat last night. You hear anything? I stared at it for a full minute. My mouth went dry. He wasn't accusing me. He was asking me. And somehow that felt worse than being hunted. It felt like being trusted. I should have ignored the message. That would have been smart. Instead I answered within 2 minutes. No idea. You all right? Even typing it made my stomach tighten. I was sitting there with his money spread across my kitchen table, acting concerned. He called almost immediately. I nearly let it ring out, but panic made me pick up. His voice sounded strange, not angry, just unsettled. He said someone had definitely been inside. The satchel had been moved. One paper was missing. Nothing else obvious. Then he said something that made my throat close. There's a neighbor with one of those hidden door cameras. Caught somebody coming in behind another tenant. Hidden camera. Real. Filmed without permission. He said the image was bad, hood up, face partly turned, but police might ask around. Then he laughed nervously and said, Probably some idiot kid. I forced out a laugh too. I could hear my own heartbeat through the phone. After we hung up, I went straight to the bathroom and threw up. For the next 2 days I lived like every knock on the door meant the end. I stopped answering unknown numbers. Kept the curtains half closed. Every time someone slowed outside my building, my chest tightened. I still had the money. That became its own kind of poison. I couldn't spend it. Couldn't put it in the bank. Couldn't even look at it without hearing Daniel's voice talking about the camera. On Saturday night I ran into my sister again. We were leaving Mum's place after helping her settle in. She asked why I looked wrecked. I said I hadn't been sleeping. Then she mentioned Daniel. completely by accident. Apparently his mother had taken a bad turn. He'd been trying to arrange care and cover fees on short notice. That missing envelope hadn't been spare cash. It was money he'd borrowed from 2 relatives. That landed like a punch. For the first time since Thursday, fear stopped being the main thing. It turned into guilt. Real guilt. Heavy enough that I couldn't breathe around it. That night I sat at my kitchen table until nearly 4 in the morning with the money in front of me. I kept trying to build one last excuse. I was desperate. I needed it more. He would recover. Every version collapsed after a few seconds. By dawn I knew I couldn't keep it. I put the cash back in the envelope, added £40 of my own, and wrote a note on plain paper. I'm sorry. You were never meant to get hurt. This was mine to carry, not yours. Cowardly, I know. No name. No explanation. Sunday evening I drove back to Alder Street. My pulse was hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The building looked exactly the same, which somehow made it worse. I waited until the street emptied. Walked up to his door. Slid the envelope through the letterbox. Then, from downstairs, I heard someone coming in. I froze. A woman's voice. The same one from that night. And this time she was coming upstairs. I turned and started down the stairs too quickly. Halfway to the landing she looked up and stopped. It was the woman from that night. I knew it immediately from her voice, even before I really saw her face. She studied me for a second, then glanced at Daniel's door behind me. You live here? She asked. My mouth went dry. I shook my head and muttered that I had the wrong flat. Terrible lie. Not even a convincing one. She didn't move. Then she said, quiet but certain, You're the man from the camera, aren't you? That sentence pinned me in place. I could have run. Instead I just stood there, feeling every stupid decision catch up at once. She told me she was Daniel's cousin. Said she'd recognized my coat from the footage the first night but hadn't been sure. Her face wasn't angry. Mostly tired. Then she asked the question I still hear sometimes. Was it really worth frightening him like that? I didn't answer her straight away because there wasn't an answer that didn't sound pathetic. Finally I said no. Just that. No. She looked at me for a long second, then nodded toward Daniel's door. He found the envelope, she said. He thought maybe whoever took it got scared. I asked if he had called the police. He did, she said. But after the money came back, he stopped pushing. That should have felt like relief. Instead it felt heavier. I walked out of that building feeling smaller than when I'd entered it. He never confronted me. Maybe he never knew for certain. Maybe he did. What changed wasn't the risk of getting caught. It was seeing how quickly I could become somebody I wouldn't respect. Not a mastermind. Not a hardened criminal. Just a frightened man teaching himself to lie. So that's my warning. Desperation makes bad logic sound honest. Envy makes other people look unreal. And once you cross that line, even getting away with it doesn't feel like freedom.